Good morning. It is my great pleasure and honor to tell you about my brother-in-law, Jean-Michel Coulon, who was a French abstract painter whom I knew for more than 45 years. Jean-Michel was born to a large, distinguished, affluent family, Protestant, educated, cultured. He was the oldest of 4 children. You see him there with his younger brother, Jean-Remy, who has his hand on his shoulder, his little brother, Jean-Francois, in his mother's lap, and his sister at the left, Denise. The family made many trips to other European countries, especially Germany, where Monsieur Coulon had friends and business associates. From an early age, Jean-Michel showed a focused interest and precocious talent for drawing. When he was 7, his father took him to see Sainte-Chapelle. The stained glass windows, filtering rays of light, made an enormous, amazing impression on him, and one he was never to forget. He went home and drew and painted with watercolors what he had seen, displaying an amazing grasp of perspective and space. When he was 15 years old, a family friend took him to meet Picasso at Picasso's studio, and Jean-Michel showed him many pieces of his work, and in addition to this drawing, which he did when he was 7 years old. Picasso wanted to keep it, but Jean-Michel refused. Jean-Michel's father was a lawyer with a prosperous law firm, one of the most prominent Parisian law offices. He specialized in German affairs. But now I've forgotten to show you some of Jean-Michel's other drawings as he was growing up. Here's one called Icefield. Look at the magnificent detail. Over here you see someone shooting a gun. Over here you see a whale in the water. Here's one of boats, ships, and what I think is marvelous about this is that he's got the shadows in the water. Look at the fantastic detail. It's not known exactly when he did these paintings. These are watercolors. Here's another one, obviously of ships from a long time ago. He loved history, he loved to read, and you can see these are powered by oarsmen and sails. Here is my favorite of the pictures, aside from the Sainte-Chapelle, which looks like Roman soldiers dueling. I don't usually like pictures that are bloody, but I happen to like this one. Look at the fringes on the helmet of the soldier. Here's a slain enemy. Another one over here gushing blood. This is a high school poster that Jean-Michel did. So, as I said, his father was a lawyer in a prosperous law firm, one of the most prominent Parisian law offices specializing in German affairs. It was on the ground floor of a family-owned building in the 16th arrondissement, where the family also lived. Not long after Hitler was elected chancellor in 1933, Jean-Michel's father, Georges Coulon, realized that his clients were supporting the Nazi regime. He broke ties with the German embassy, sent back their cases to the large industrials and rich bankers, and closed his firm to show his opposition to Hitler. He was 51 years old, and the active, well-off life of the family changed dramatically without his steady income. However, despite the limited economic circumstances of the family, Jean-Michel was able to make some trips to Germany as a teenager, staying with friends and learning fluent German, which would turn out to be a life-saving skill. He witnessed the rise of fascism there and saw and heard Hitler address the German crowds. Because an uncle, a brother of his mother, had an important position in a shipping company, Jean-Michel was able to board a cargo ship for free and sail along the coasts of Africa and the Mediterranean. Living next door to the Coulons in Paris was a Jewish family, the Debrés, who were very close friends. Their younger son, Olivier, was born the same year as Jean-Michel, and the boys grew up as best friends, both loving to draw and paint. As teenagers, the two went to Italy and there heard Mussolini in Rome. As you might see, my presentation today is a bit different from other ones because I did know the artist. So it's going to be very heavy on family history and some art history, and also just my personal reminiscences. After his baccalaureate, Jean-Michel begins studies in literature, law, and history in Paris. He is 20 when war breaks out, so he leaves Paris and continues his studies in Aix-en-Provence. In just 6 weeks, May 10th to June 25, 1940, German forces defeated Allied forces, conquering France, Belgium, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands. German soldiers quickly occupied Paris and half of France. The other half was in control of the collaborative Vichy government. That included Aix-en-Provence. The Coulons were still in Paris at 118 Rue de la Faisanderie and hiding Jewish families in their large apartment. In 1942, Hitler appointed a Karl Oberg as Grand Master of all police organizations in France. The Gestapo headquarters were established at 49 Rue de la Faisanderie, right down the street from the Coulons' home. I can just imagine Monsieur Coulon strolling down the street, tipping his hat to the Nazi officers and chatting with them in his perfect German while he and his wife were hiding and helping escaping Jews. During the war, finally he had a job. He was appointed as advisor to the Court of Appeals in Aix-en-Provence. In 1943, the Vichy government established a Service du Travail Obligatoire, or compulsory work service. Young men born between 1920 and 1922 were required to register to be sent to Germany to work in factories there. Few of those young men would ever return. Exemptions promised to students like Jean-Michel were not honored. Jean-Michel obtained a false identity card in the name of Dobermann. Since the City Hall in Paris had been bombed, it was impossible to verify its authenticity. Jean-Michel and his Jewish friend, Olivier Debré, left and fled to a small town in the French Alps. One day, they were hiking in the mountains and met a German patrol. Jean-Michel, thinking quickly and speaking with a perfect Austrian-German accent, convinced the officers that they were on vacation from Austria and just hiking in the Alps. It worked, probably avoiding a fatal arrest. It was during this time in the Alps together that the two friends decided to devote themselves to painting and to abstract painting. Jean-Remy, Jean-Michel's then 19-year-old brother, had become a soldier in the French resistance. In June of 1944, following the Allied landings in France, he and some other soldiers were captured and shot at a farm. Those soldiers were awarded posthumously the Military Cross, the Medal of Resistance, and the Legion of Honor. The day after his son's execution, his father was dismissed from his job at the Court of Appeals in Provence. I don't know what the Nazis were thinking at that time after the Allied invasion, but they clearly thought they could still win the war. But after the liberation, Monsieur Coulon was appointed to chair the second chamber of the Court of Appeals in Paris. Now I want to give you a little art history background, which is about what was called the School of Paris. It refers to the French and émigré artists who worked in Paris during the early decades of the 20th century, from about 1900 to 1940. Many were foreigners who left their native countries for political reasons as a result of the Russian Revolution and World War I. Marc Chagall and Pablo Picasso are just two of the examples. Artists of the so-called Paris School of Paris were avant-garde artists who brought brilliantly original approaches and techniques to art. They were different from each other and associated with movements of Fauvism, Cubism, Futurism, Surrealism, and many others, or no movement at all. Chagall, for example, never identified himself with any art movement. But in general, the School of Paris artists were figurative or representational artists. By the last decades of the 19th century, Paris had become the center of Western art. After the enormous suffering of World War II, an exhausted Paris quickly became energized and rejuvenated and began rebuilding the city and ready to embrace all kinds of new directions in art. A new group of artists came to the fore and became known as the New Paris School, or the Second School of Paris. Jean-Michel was part of this group, whose members chose to develop the new art, abstract art, already pioneered by Wassily Kandinsky. These non-figurative artists were opposed to the strict geometric abstraction of the recent past as seen in the work of Kazimir Malevich, L. Lisitsky, and others, and instead emphasized spontaneity, free expression, freedom from rules, dogmas, canons of beauty, or as one artist put it. They believed abstract art could express ideas, beauty, feelings as powerfully as representational art. Upon his return to Paris, Jean-Michel began painting seriously. However, his ambition to be an artist was a great disappointment to his father, who had expected him to continue in the family law firm. Money and supplies were short and scarce, so Jean-Michel painted on paper, cardboard, pieces of wood, fragments of cloth, even potato sacks that were sewn together. His first works, as you see, were twisting lines, geometric forms, serpentine networks, and limited to earth tones, ochres, grays, white, and black, somber colors reflecting the grief of the preceding years. As the future began to look more hopeful, gradually bright colors appear. Jean-Michel and his work begin to be recognized and admired. Here's a self-portrait from this time, 1945. And here's one of the paintings that he did, showing the evolution to the very wonderful bright colors. This is oil on canvas. Here's another one of my favorite. I happen to like blues and aquas and turquoise. And here's another beautiful one that Aline hangs in her living room in Paris. It's now 1949, and my sister-in-law, Carolyn Garabedian, enters the story. She had graduated from Smith College and won a Fulbright scholarship to study violin at the Conservatory of Music in Paris. Quite an achievement. She and my husband, Paul, had learned French from the time they were very young, and she was also a French minor at Smith College, and so by the time she got to Paris, she was absolutely fluent and really bilingual. She did get her music degree there, and then she told me herself that she knew that she didn't play the violin well enough to join an orchestra or a chamber music group. At least that's what she thought. But she had fallen in love with Paris. So she did not want to go home and merely be a violin teacher. So instead, she stayed in Paris and she got a job at the American Embassy. And one day, or one evening, she was invited to a party and she met Jean-Michel Coulon. He was tall, dark, handsome, the classic handsome guy. He was charming, erudite. He looked very much like the American movie star Gregory Peck. I think that it was probably basically love at first sight on her side, but in any case, she never really told me that, but she did tell me how they met. Here's a watercolor from 1948 I forgot to do before. And here are Carolyn and Jean-Michel on bicycles around 1950. Here is a lovely painting of Jean-Michel's from 1947. I think it's quite unusual because there are so many pastels. But the reason I'm showing you this painting is that for his lady love, Jean-Michel had a scarf made based on, more or less, on this painting and the colors in the painting. You cannot buy this scarf. It was never generally for sale. It was made only for Carolyn. And then another one made only for Carolyn. And you can see back here the painting. I don't have a full slide of this, but a painting that he based this scarf on. Rather sweet, right? Jean-Michel becomes friends with many painters. In 1949, he is invited to exhibit along with several other Paris painters at the Jeanne Bucher Gallery in Montparnasse. Jeanne Bucher had opened her gallery in 1925 and became well known for discovering and exhibiting avant-garde art, modern, and then abstract artists. Being exhibited at the Jeanne Bucher Gallery was the best guarantee of recognition for a painter at that time. And Jean-Michel was invited to exhibit there with a group of other painters. And we don't know exactly what painting he exhibited there, but I'm going to show you some paintings that are representational of what he exhibited. This was from 1948. Remember, the exhibition was 1949. Here's another one. And as we go along, you will see how his style changed. This one on cardboard. The list of painters with whom Jean-Michel exhibited at that gallery in 1949 is dazzling. Georges Braque, Picasso, Paul Klee, Kandinsky, and Jean-Michel's particular friends André Lanskoy, Nicolas de Staël, Maria Helena Vieira da Silva, and others. And I want to talk a little bit about each one of those painters because they were Jean-Michel's good friends. They were his circle. André Lanskoy. He was born in Moscow in 1902, and he fought with the White Army during the Russian Civil War following the revolution, and then he had to get out. He fled Russia and went to Paris. He is quoted as saying, "The first night there, I started to paint and haven't stopped since." Like many of the other abstract painters, he began as a figurative painter. This is what he was doing actually when he first went to Paris. And to me it looks like a impressionist painting, though I don't know that it's ever been called that. And it's the villa or the house with the closed gate. I'm giving you the titles in the original French, and then I'll tell you what I think they are in English. But Lanskoy became an abstract artist. And this is the painting that he exhibited at that 1949 Jeanne Bucher exhibition. So during the 1930s, he began a transition to abstract art. Jean-Michel's father was Lanskoy's lawyer for some years when he first came to Paris with very little money. In payment for his legal services, Lanskoy gave Monsieur Coulon paintings, 6 in all. Aline still has 4 of them hanging in her apartment. Monsieur Coulon and Lanskoy had many conversations about art at the Coulon home. So Jean-Michel knew André Lanskoy from the time he was very young, and Lanskoy was probably the one who introduced him to Picasso. Nicolas de Staël. He was born in Russia. His family was forced to flee to Poland because of the Russian Revolution. He and his sister were orphaned there and sent to live with a Russian family in Brussels. He moved to Paris as a young man and would eventually become a French citizen. Jean-Michel and de Staël became very good friends. They had many discussions about approaches to abstract painting, how to give life to color, and especially the technique of impasto, which means thick layers of paint. De Staël became hugely successful in Europe and the United States. When they were friends, and before de Staël was so very successful, de Staël suggested that they exchange 5 paintings, that he give Jean-Michel 5 of his paintings and Jean-Michel give him 5 of his own, meaning that, you know, then if they, one of them became famous and needed money, they had the, you know, 5 of the paintings. Unfortunately, Jean-Michel refused, so they did not trade. I want to show you this picture of de Staël's, which was the one exhibited at the Jeanne Bucher Gallery. And I want to point out this tiny little, tiny little dot of red here. I think it's so interesting. And it's almost right in the center of the painting.
What size of picture?
Yeah, I'm sorry, you know, I don't have that, I'm sorry. Here's one that hangs at the Tate Modern and is, he called it a landscape study. Here's another one. This is the Agrigento Temple in Sicily. This one, the French translation is trees and houses. I think it's very interesting that many of the abstract painters did these blocks of color. Helena Vieira da Silva was another good friend of Jean-Michel's. She was Portuguese, but she moved to Paris when she was 20 to study sculpture, but she shifted to painting and very quickly took on an abstract geometric style. She attained French nationality and lived in France for the rest of her life, but Portugal is certainly claiming her as one of their own. She gained a great worldwide reputation and was awarded many prizes and honors. Here is the painting that she showed at the Jeanne Bucher Gallery exhibition of 1949. This is, of course, the train station at Saint-Lazare. Here is one. You can see the blocks of color. It is called papillon, which means butterflies in French, and you can see a slight impression of a butterfly. And this one, the arena. Now we come to Jean-Michel's old friend, Olivier Debré. This is a 1961 photograph, so he was already 41 years old, but it's the best one I could find. He became a very well-known painter in France. This is means still life in English. It was painted around 1950. I said he became very well known, which he did. He went into some stage design and also curtains and draperies for operas and plays, although he did paint for the rest of his life. However, Olivier Debré did have a great advantage because his brother, his older brother, Michel Debré, was a very prominent politician in France. He was finance minister of France and prime minister of France. So perhaps that helped Olivier's rise to fame. Um, 1950 was a very eventful year for Jean-Michel. He was invited to present his own solo exhibition at the Jeanne Bucher Gallery. Here's the announcement. And here is one of the paintings that he exhibited at the Jeanne Bucher Gallery. The same year, Jean-Michel won a competition and was awarded a French state grant and spent 3 months in Amsterdam. He studied and worked with an expert on the Dutch painter Vermeer and visited museums and galleries and discovered the Dutch masters from Rembrandt to Mondrian. Along with other artists, he regularly was invited to exhibit at various salons in Paris, notably the Salon de Réalité Nouvelle, which is still operating. They do one exhibition a year. It is a group of artists and patrons. It's not, however, commercial. It's not for commercial purposes. Still, in 1950, the Sydney Janus Gallery in New York assembled an exhibition. Wait, I forgot something. This was for Jean-Michel's solo exhibition at the Jeanne Bucher Gallery. These are the names of people who signed what was called the Gold Book. In other words, people who came to see the exhibition. And you can see a bunch of famous names here, starting at the top with Mark Rothko, Pierre Soulages, André Lanskoy, etc. Many famous people came. He's invited to exhibit at the Sydney Janus Gallery here in New York. There was an exhibition composed mostly of composed of 15 young French artists and 15 American artists. Jean-Michel is asked to be one of the 15 artists. Once again, he exhibits with artists who are or will be famous. And these are just some of the artists who exhibited at that exhibition in 1950 at the Sydney Janus Gallery. So you will recognize the names. I'd just like to point out that Pierre Soulages, he was French, of course, and if you don't know him, he loved the color black, and he painted all kinds of pictures with black, some of them just with black, some of them with little bits of other colors. But he is still alive. He will be 100 in December. You certainly probably recognize the other names here, and that's just the short list of people who exhibited at the Sydney Janus Gallery. Most of the American artists are part of a post-World War II movement that came to be known as abstract impressionism, and Joan Diamond is going to... Expressionist, sorry. Abstract expressionism. Did I say impressionism? Sorry. Abstract expressionism, which was developed in New York, the first specifically American movement to achieve international influence, rivaling the new Paris School and eventually putting New York City at the center of the Western art world. In early 1952, Jean-Michel takes part in a poster exhibition at the Museum of Modern Art here, but we don't have a picture of that. Then a terrible tragedy in 1952, his little brother, Jean-Francois, who was a pilot in the French Air Force, is killed when his plane crashes in a mission over Tunisia. Jean-Michel goes through a period of dark years. He and Carolyn are married in 1953 in a simple ceremony at the town hall in the 16th arrondissement. Carolyn and Jean-Michel wear very dark gray suits because they felt it was in honor of Jean-Michel's brother who had been killed. In 1955, just as Jean-Michel was preparing for a very important exhibition at a major Paris gallery, the house where they lived in Orléans burned with his studio and all the paintings. So he had to cancel the exhibition in Paris, which was at a major museum. Another thing I forgot to tell you is that when Carolyn married Jean-Michel, she was working at the American Embassy, and she could no longer work there because the rules at that time were that you could not work at the American Embassy if you were married to a foreigner. So they moved to Orléans in France, and she worked at the NATO headquarters there. In the same year, later that year, Carolyn and Jean-Michel go to New York. It is Jean-Michel's first visit to the United States. They go by ship, and he is immensely overwhelmed and impressed and astonished by the skyscrapers of New York. Remember, this is 1955, and there was nothing like it yet in Europe. Europe was trying to recover from the war and rebuild. They did not have skyscrapers. When he came back, no, wait a minute. So he went through this period of painting very dark paintings, as you see here. I happen to like this one, but most of the very dark paintings he did, I don't like so much. But I've chosen to show you this one, but I do want to show you, point out this piece of white right in the middle of the painting, as if it's like a ray of hope. The Coulons, then they go to New York, and I think this is a wonderful photograph. It's not taken right after their marriage, but when they went to New York in 1955. In 1957, their daughter Aline is born, so that was a very happy event. And here are paintings that Jean-Michel did after seeing the skyscrapers in New York. And I want to read you what he said about these paintings. And I also want you to notice that his style has changed. It's become very, very vertical, as if he, I'm not saying that he was trying to paint something that looked like a skyscraper. I'm just saying that he was inspired with some of these paintings by what he saw in New York. This is what he wrote. I love New York, perhaps even more than Washington. This is a really lively city, not a museum city. One can criticize New York and all will be true, that it is a dirty city, a tough city, it's an exhausting city, that it is a city with no charm. It does not matter, because such a sense of grandeur emanates from New York that we are filled with admiration. I have rarely seen anything more beautiful. This is not a plastic, formal beauty, because in details, everything is ugly. But that does not matter. Everything is grand. We live on a different scale, at a different pace, and it exerts on us a lasting fascination. And here's another painting inspired by New York. Here are the strict vertical paintings that Jean-Michel shifted to. Aline likes to call these little pieces down here, feet. Here's another one with the foot here. Jean-Michel did not give titles to any of his paintings, and he shifted around this time to painting mostly on wood. Is that right, Ellie? Mm-hmm. So he started out, he painted on whatever he could paint on, and painted on canvas and some on wood, and in the end he painted only on wood, and his paintings became smaller. He did what is called impasto, which is layers of paint, to paint on canvas. The canvas would sometimes buckle just with the weight of the paint and cause the paint to crack. So he began painting only on wood. Oh, this is where I come into the story. This was taken the evening that my husband and I, Paul, were married. And this is a painting I have over my sofa in my living room. It was a wedding gift from Carolyn and Jean-Michel. I'd also like to say that he did his own framing. So when we got this painting, it was already framed as you see it. Now, we went to France and some other countries on our honeymoon, and we visited Jean-Michel and Carolyn in Orléans, and we chose this painting, which also hangs in my living room. You know, you might think, well, they lived in Europe and we lived in New York, so how much did we really see each other? Well, we saw each other quite a lot. For one thing, when Carolyn worked at NATO, she was actually required to come back to her home country every other summer, and she had about 6 weeks vacation then to reestablish her American loyalty. And they stayed with us in New York, they stayed with us in Fire Island, they saw other people as well. Carolyn would come every year because her mother was still here, and we went frequently also to Europe. My husband was a well-known mathematician and invited lots of places, so we saw them also in Europe. So it was a close relationship. And I want to say that Jean-Michel was absolutely lovely, gracious, wonderfully kind to me in many ways. He took me to see places when my husband went off somewhere else to give his talk, and he did something very, very practical for me. He taught me how to make an omelet. In 1971, our older daughter, Emily, was born, and we were sent this painting in honor of her birth. It also hangs in my apartment, and I absolutely love it. I think it's so cheerful for the joy of a birth. In 1966, de Gaulle decided to withdraw NATO from France. That meant that Carolyn could no longer work at NATO there. So they moved to Brussels, which became the NATO headquarters, and she worked there. And Jean-Michel, in 1971, had a solo exhibition at the Regency Gallery there in Brussels. It was a big success, and he sold 18 paintings. Now, the mystery is that after that, wait, I missed something here. This is Jean-Michel at the time of the painting. The mystery is that after this very, very successful exhibition in Brussels, where he sold 18 paintings, he never exhibited again. He went almost every day and painted at his studio, but he refused to exhibit. He was offered exhibitions, but he refused. He never explained why. He would simply vaguely say, "I'm not ready," but he never exhibited again. However, when he died in 2014, Aline went into his locked studio and found some 600 paintings, watercolors, and collages, which she's now organizing and exhibiting to establish a very deserved legacy for her father. I'm going to show you some other paintings that were found. This is something in the 1970s. I think it's very beautiful. Here's another one. Here. So the family always traveled a lot, and Jean-Michel painted two paintings inspired by his trips to Venice. If you look up here, you can see blue windows, which I think are, reflected in some of the colors here. Let me read you what he said about Venice. Of all the wonders I have seen here, Venice is still, I think, the most beautiful. And if you are a complete innocent like me, you head straight for the center, marveling along the way at the lapping of the canals, the softly decaying walls, the unexpected angles of the roofs, the picturesque alleyways, barely 2 meters wide at most, the little bridges with steps up and down each side, the piazzas with their Baroque churches, the palazzi that look like ordinary houses, only more ornate, and the houses that look like palazzi, the washing lines strung from the windows of rich and poor alike, not to mention the loggias, balconies, arbors, and shadowy streets leading nowhere. The sudden arrivals at landing stages where little boats bob up and down with a gentle splish-splash, not forgetting above all the marvelous, limpid, golden light in which everything is bathed. This I put in just for a bit of humor. It is my husband Paul on the left, Jean-Michel. We were in the French Alps coming back from a sabbatical in Japan, and the two brothers-in-law are comparing their bottles of martini. Jean-Michel's formats became quite small as the decades went on, partly because he was painting on wood and very, very thick paint. These are very tiny paintings, which I've seen. I call them the little jewels. They are 4 inches by about 3.5 inches. I will be showing you some close-ups also, but I want you to notice the different brush strokes. He painted with a fairly thick brush stroke, and you can see vertical brush strokes, horizontal brush strokes, some on the diagonal. This one I like to call the diamond jewels. So here's a close-up. As I said, as the decades went on, he overlaid, painted many layers of paint, so that if you see these paintings, some of them, they seem to kind of glow with light, because you can see the paint underneath. He purposely leaves the paint underneath here. You can see the thick brush strokes here. And here is a new technique he was trying, which was to paint in many layers and then take a file and striate the paint. There are not very many paintings of these, but it was something that he was experimenting with. And here again you can see the thick paint and the colors from underneath. His use of color and the layering of the paint was just dazzling. I mean, that is one of his, certainly his major achievements. What he did with color is just absolutely wonderful. Here's another one, and this also looks like he was experimenting to get the colors underneath. In the year 2000, Carolyn retired from her job at NATO in Brussels, and the Coulons moved back to Paris, and Jean-Michel began a whole different project in his art, which he did collages, practically only collages from this time until his death. In this collage, you can see not only strips of paper, plain paper, you can see underneath print from newspapers or magazines, and also there's paint. So he also used paint in these collages. And of course, the frame is painted. Here is another one. And here is something quite interesting. He did collages where he purposely only pasted them or attached them at the top of the strip, and therefore the little strips kind of have a life of their own and can curl up in moisture or flatten out. Here's a side view of one of these collages. So he attached many strips of paper overlaying them on each other. So actually these collages are kind of three-dimensional. And Aline is now having some of them framed and covered with a piece of glass or plastic, but not against the collage, but an inch or so away from it, so these little pieces of paper sort of take on a life of their own. This is one of my favorites, and one of the ones that was used for a poster. Here are a bunch of little collages. And these were found by Aline when she went into his studio. Now, it may look to you like they're hanging on a wall, but no, this is the way he worked. These were on the floor, and he worked on the floor to put together his collages, and probably some of his paintings too. But we don't know, because no one was allowed in his studio for all those years. Okay, so Aline very much wants to establish a legacy for her father. So she produced this small booklet, which I have here, with what I call one of the little jewels on the cover. And then a large art book here. And here was the launch of this art book at the bookstore. And here is Aline with her 5 men. So here's her husband, and the other handsome young men are her sons. Yes, they are charming and handsome and always warmly embrace me when I come to visit, so it's quite wonderful for me. Okay, in October, Aline had an exhibition at the Dutco Gallery in Paris. I went there for the opening night of the exhibition. And you might recognize the 2 ladies in this photograph. Aline then arranged an exhibition at a small museum, the Art Museum of Châtillon, which is a suburb of Paris. And I don't know how well you can see it, but the collage that I showed you before was on a poster advertising this exhibition. Now, I hope that it's going to work. There is a short video of this exhibition. The problem is that it's in French, so I'm not going to try to translate it word for word, but it is really what I've told you about Jean-Michel's life. So I think you'll understand what's being said, more or less.
C'est une très belle histoire que nous raconte la Maison des Arts de Châtillon, aux portes de Paris, celle de l'un des artistes les plus secrets qu'il soit. Son nom ne vous parlera donc pas forcément, mais son histoire et ses œuvres devraient vous bouleverser. Jean-Michel Coulon, jeune adolescent, il est repéré par Picasso en personne qui lui demande s'il veut bien lui offrir son œuvre. Le jeune Jean-Michel refuse catégoriquement et s'enfuit en courant. C'est un peu l'histoire de sa vie, un talent immense qui, dès qu'il est un peu trop sous les projecteurs, prend peur et suscite chez l'artiste une irrépressible envie d'isolement. C'est à nouveau le cas dans les années 40, il a 20 ans et il expose déjà aux côtés de Braque, Klee, de Staël ou Kandinsky. À 30 ans, il expose à New York, entouré par Rothko et Soulages, Léger, Dubuffet et Pollock, puis plus rien. Une étoile qui, contre toute attente, d'un coup, se coupe du monde. Silence sur les ondes. Que s'est-il passé? On évoque la disparition de ses deux jeunes frères, l'un fusillé par les Allemands pendant la guerre, l'autre aviateur s'écrasant en mission dans les années qui suivirent. On parle de l'incendie qui a dévasté son atelier en 1955, mais peu importe en réalité. Coulon aime le rapport intime et exclusif à la peinture. Il ne peint pas pour les autres et encore moins pour la reconnaissance ou la gloire. Il peint pour l'amour de l'art. Il ne laisse personne entrer dans son atelier, véritable antre de création. L'artiste développe en secret une œuvre abstraite, cohérente et puissante, avec une écriture résolument géométrique, peinte au couteau, travaillant la couleur à vif. Ses quadrillages s'apparentent à des mosaïques irrégulières. Certains y verront des motifs de vitraux, des maillages urbains ou des champs vus du ciel, des œuvres d'un lyrisme contenu, absolument non figurative, mais qui puissent pourtant leurs inspirations dans le monde réel. Les couleurs métalliques des villes dans lesquelles l'artiste se rend, la grisaille urbaine, les teintes argileuses aussi, une œuvre invisible et mystérieuse qui ne sera découverte par sa fille qu'à sa mort en 2014. Elle découvrira alors avec stupeur et émerveillement, et vous imaginez une immense émotion, 800 huiles sur toile et collages laissés par un père qui, de son vivant, n'avait jamais laissé percer le mystère de sa peinture. Ici, c'est une révélation. Une cinquantaine de ses créations jamais vues du public auparavant, des années 1940 aux années 1990, qui nous font approcher au plus près de l'une des plus belles énigmes du monde de l'art.
About the fact that Jean-Michel refused to exhibit his art after the 1970s. Oh, sorry. I wanted to say a few words about the fact that Jean-Michel refused to exhibit his art after the 1970s, and he never really explained why. He seemed to view his art as his own private passion, his own mission, and he refused to make any efforts to make it appealing to other people or to sell. He did not care about the opinions of critics or indeed of any third party. He did not show his work even to his family or his close friends. Now, if you think that made him some strange recluse, you would be wrong. He loved his wife, he adored his daughter and her 4 sons, and loved spending time with them. He could be quite social and talkative. He had a great sense of humor and could be a lot of fun. And now I want to call up my niece just to say hello at the podium. This is, of course, a picture of her and her father and her doll.
Don't get down too fast. Thank you so much. I think Lynnel did a very good job. We went into a lot of work together. It was a lot of fun. She raised some questions for which I didn't have all the answers, but I think that the overall talk really reflects what we went through.
I'd like to point out that Aline's dress is very much like her father's.
I am obsessed with colors. Thank you very much for hosting this talk. Thank you to Bob for fiddling around with the video that
Took us some
minutes to
get the
fit
video.
in, and for listening to this talk. You're the second audience to have listened to a presentation. The first one was done by an art historian in Châtillon during the last exhibit, and we shall have many others. I hope we will have an exhibition in Brazil in June, and we will have some new books launched in September, and maybe hopefully some show in Paris if things work out as I hope so. Thank you so much.
Any questions? No? Yes.
Okay. Wait for the mic, please, with questions.
How much time did each one of these paintings on average take? Because to me it looked pretty intricate with all the different boxes and different colors and lines. On the other hand, maybe it was just quick because of his going so long.
I think so. Over the 70 years he worked, I have about 850 works. So if you divide it, the average would be about a month per painting. The thing is that he started and you think that he would finish, but in his mind I think he never finished an artwork, and he went over and over again. So in fact the 850 works I have do appeal quite a lot, and indeed a lot to deal with, but some other painters have much more, some have less. It depends into what details you go into, in fact, and he was going over and over again.
You know, he died in October of 2014. He was working almost until the end. He did get sick. He had to have surgery 2 years before he died, and he was no longer able to go to his studio. He was in a wheelchair. Nevertheless, he worked at home through all that time until just before his death, right? And he seemed, as Aline has told me, very serene and still very energized to do his work. I mean, he never gave up, he never stopped, and he just seemed to thrive on the love of doing his art. Joan?
Thank you very much for that. That series of beautiful, beautiful paintings, which I so enjoy, and I'm sure everybody else did too. I just want to remark, I've been saturating myself, marinating myself, soaking myself in American abstract expressionism for the last month or so, and preparing a presentation that I will then give here.
We're looking forward to that, Joan.
Yes, thank you very much. Me too, actually. And I just want to say, even though neither of the groups of paintings, if you compared abstract expressionism with Monsieur Coulon's paintings, are figurative. They're all completely abstract. I think both of them express two contrasting cultures in the most remarkable way. Because what struck me about the Coulon paintings was the balanced, classic, almost, you could call it classical, dignity, restraint, that is so French to my mind.
Thank you. That's a marvelous observation, Joan. Yes, you know, he worked very carefully within kind of a classical format of idea.
Not trading the paintings with the other artists and not titling them. It's pretty unusual, I think. I mean, are there other artists that don't want their works to be seen? I guess the other question is that when he sold all those paintings, was that enough for him to live on for the rest of his life?
Or you know, the the other thing, well, it wasn't, Carolyn continued to work. But the other thing is, how did he feel about the fact that his friend, Nicolas de Staël, committed suicide under this enormous pressure from all these art dealers who wanted him to produce more and more and slightly different paintings because they were interested in selling them. And the paintings were selling like crazy. And how much did Jean-Michel either consciously or unconsciously think, I don't want that kind of pressure. I want to paint whatever I want to paint at my own pace. I mean, we don't know.
Suicide was not unknown among artists. Mark Rothko was one of the ones you mentioned. Gorky, sure there were others.
Thank you for including me. It was a real pleasure to be at that vernissage as I learned the word. It was also fascinating to look, once you pointed out the feet, that in every painting there was that connection to the, it felt like a connection to the earth. It went down to the end of the wood or canvas, and it really was a grounding in every piece. Is really quite beautiful. So thank you.
Thank you.
I saw that as more of an escape. Many artists put things in their pictures that would allow them to escape from the art. Ladders, quite common. In Moreau's exhibit right now at MoMA, you'll find ladders. De Kooning used ladders. That was my reference. Do we have any more questions? The fact that he worked with so many materials, does that relate to his doing the collage work in the later years?
The fact that he worked with so many different materials, do you think that led to his collage work?
I don't know, but the fact that at 80 years old he completely renewed his style with collage is still a mystery to me.
Matisse, the same thing?
Yes, yes.
Disability often in having you use your hands when you're painting very hard as you age to do sculpture, to do painting, so collage is easier.
Yes.
Hi, wanted to ask Aline about her growing up. Your father busy painting and working on his art. Your mother was working. What was your childhood like? And also, what career path did you take? Was it in the art world?
Well, it was a very unusual life retrospectively, but at the time I thought it perfectly normal. I now understand how it was different from some of my friends, and obviously I wanted to earn a living of my own and became an MD. So nothing to do with the art world.
An MD?
Yeah,
MD?
A physician.
Oh, wow. And 4 sons, oh my God.
Well, they talk about the medical arts.
Well, Arlene, you're not really completely right, because now you've retired and you've just delved yourself into this art world to establish a legacy for your father. So you are doing something in art.
Yeah, finally.
There's also going to be a book of published letters that Jean-Michel wrote, mostly from America, but from other countries.
From Italy also?
From Italy also, that he wrote to his parents when he and Carolyn were traveling, with pictures of some of the paintings that he produced, you know, being inspired by these travels. I did show you the ones from New York and Venice, but there are others as well. So Aline is also going to publish a book of his letters, and I read you some of his commentary. I mean, he was a brilliant man and very facile with languages, and he knew many languages. When he met Carolyn, he didn't know English. He knew French, German, Italian, and Spanish, but he learned English very quickly after he met her.
Just a question, how was it to be moved from Paris to Brussels? In a whole, I mean, obviously language was the same or somewhat, but just to be moved as a child and back.
I think that for a child it's much more easy than for an adult. I think that leaving Paris for my father was somewhat difficult. The family very often almost commuted to Paris over the weekends. Belgium is a very nice country to live in. It's very warm. The weather is awful. It's cold, so people are very nice.
And you went to a French school.
I went to a French school and kept some very nice friends over there. I saw the exhibit to come in Brussels, where my parents lived for 30 years, has a strong rationale. And Belgium is very nice to live in.
And if she had gone to a Belgian school, she would have had to learn Flemish and be taught partly in Flemish, so her parents put her in a French school.
Did he ever talk to you about his painting, his art, why he loved abstract expressionism, why he moved away from figurative art, and why he was selecting some of the colors that he did? Did he ever sit down and say, I want you to understand what I'm trying to do here? Anything like that?
He never spoke of himself, nor of his art, nor of his family, his dead brothers. He was very secretive about his own feelings. He liked to travel. He was very curious. We went to see many chateaus and churches and exhibitions and countrysides he needed to see, but that's all I could say.
Okay, well,
Ruth,
okay, one last question. Ruth, you have a question? Okay, you're the last one. Last but not least.
I wonder how he would feel about your setting up all these exhibitions.
I don't know. I'm a little bit afraid when I get up there that he cuts my throat.
Okay, one.
Yes, thanks to Linnel and Arlene
thank you so much for coming.
for a remarkable presentation.